William Hutchinson Murray was a Scottish mountaineer, an explorer, and a conservationist. Born in 1913, he was one of the men who helped pave the way for the first descent of Mount Everest. He was one of those larger-than-life figures that you actually can't believe was real. In World War II, he was captured by the Nazis in Egypt, and he spent most of the war in prison camps. While a prisoner, he wrote his first book on mountaineering on the back of toilet paper. He'd already written dozens of pages, spent countless hours of work across multiple years when the Gestapo found the manuscript and destroyed it. He shrugged and started the book over again. After the war, he became an award-winning author for his books on mountaineering, on nature, and on conservation. Anyway, now that you know a little bit more about Murray, I want to talk about one of my favorite quotes from him. He talked about preparing for one of his famous journeys to the Himalayas when he wrote, "But when I said that nothing had been done, I erred in one important manner. We definitely committed ourselves. We put down our passage money, booked a sailing to Bombay. This may sound too simple, but it is in great consequence. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then all sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred." This show is about decision-making, and a key part of decision-making is having the courage to decide. As Murray said, when we make a commitment, when we make the decision to act, 1,000 little things tend to fall in place for us. Another way of saying it is that old proverb, fortune favors the bold. So be thoughtful, gather the data, make sure you're thorough and deliberate. But then it's also important to remember to commit and be bold in our decision making. So with that said, I love this week's interview with Jason Vogel. Jason is the IT manager of business intelligence and data management for AutoZone. He's someone who's been really bold and decisive in his decision making, and I think you'll see that from this interview. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to Truth Be Known. So welcome to another episode of Truth Be Known. I'm so excited for our guest today. We have Jason Vogel from AutoZone. Jason, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, this is Jason Vogel. I've been at AutoZone now for about 2 years. I'm an IT manager in our business intelligence group, specifically over our Talend developers. I have approximately 15 developers reporting up to me. They're based here in the U.S. as well in Mexico.
Awesome. And I happen to know a little bit about your company and some of the things you've done, and you've made such incredible strides with data and how you're using data to make business decisions. If you want to tell everybody a little bit about it.
Sure. When I started at AutoZone a little over 2 years ago, I was brought in to effectively fix the team. They had been trying to use Talend in a variety of projects, and there'd been some serious struggles there. Part of the problem has to do with that AutoZone followed what I call the database flavor of the month club, and so during their 40 years of existence, they had between 20 and 30 different instances and types of databases. And so then when you started multiplying that out by the actual occurrences of it, there were thousands upon thousands of databases here at AutoZone. And so like everywhere, one team had access to most of the data that they needed, but not all. And so Talend was partially being used effectively to move that data around and try to get the data to the users, but it wasn't being particularly effective. When I was brought in, the expectation was that I would fix the team and fix this and fix that, and it needed quite a bit of work. Specifically, the model they were following was they would put a Talend developer on a team, and that one individual would be responsible for addressing data movement within that one project. I came in and challenged that approach, and we moved to moving data in a more shared services model. And so from a decision standpoint, it was rough because a lot of people are like, oh, we've tried that before, that doesn't work. We've heard about it, but it's just not effective. And I was able to, quite frankly, prove them wrong. We effectively doubled our throughput, significantly reduced our failures, and we were able to take our deployments down to from requirements to deployment to approximately 3 weeks. One of the side effects of this was that we moved from project SMEs to more generalized knowledge among the developers. And it was interesting as people started to recognize and accept that this was a model that worked.
And how do you combat that when you have people coming in saying, we've always done this before. This is how we've done this way before, and we've tried that solution, and you know it doesn't work. And how do you combat that and show people there's a better way?
To be honest, start small, right? It might be a proof of concept. It might simply be a critical project with some real visibility, but don't bite off more than you can chew, right? Talend's a powerful tool, but like all development tools, you can do things 1,000 different ways. So what we started doing was we took a small project, started looking at how we would approach it, um, spend a little bit more time in design, and then do the execution. And that's one of the things that I particularly like about Talend is being able to really spend time in that visual UI and really see how the data is going to flow, as opposed to worrying about syntax and constructs and all the things that we normally do in development. We were able to really focus on the overall process, so we could step back and look at things in the 30,000 foot view, and then jump in at a detail and fix that, step back out and review it, step back in and fix another detail. And so the end result was something, not only did we feel like it processed it well, but we were able then to take that UI and show it to the business. And they could actually go, oh, yeah, that makes sense to us too. That's actually what we want. So it's kind of a hybrid model in the standpoint that it's not pure agile, but it's also not pure waterfall. It's a nice mix.
Awesome. And you've got a long history in tech. How did you get started? How did you get started in tech?
Um, I don't think I had a choice, to be perfectly honest.
Mhm.
My dad had the second master's in computer science issued from the University of Houston. My mom was at NASA. She did
Oh,
Apollo
wow.
8 and Apollo 11. So both my parents were computer geeks before anybody in the world seemed to really know what a computer geek was. I mean, I can remember playing Hunt the Wampus on a Data General mainframe at the office when I was a little kid. We had a mini computer in the house for a number of years, back when they were quite large, and that was just kind of normal for us. Later in high school, I was Louisiana's representative to the Department of Energy supercomputer program, so I got to go do development on a Cray 2 supercomputer in Lawrence Livermore lab in California. And for the true geeks out there, might or might not know that the chair in Tron where they zap him in is actually in that lab. I've actually even sat in that chair.
Oh, that's cool. I hope you've got a photo of you sitting in that chair.
I don't, unfortunately. It's terrible. I have a picture of me next to the Cray, but that's it.
And how big was the mini computer? I feel like I need context on how big one of the original mini
Um,
computers were.
it was square, and it was probably 5 feet by 5 feet, five by 5 by 5. I mean, it was large.
That's
I mean, it
and
it it
where we are now.
yeah, and it was weird because we actually had to take out an extra insurance policy at the house to be able to cover this piece of hardware because it was so big and expensive.
It's amazing. And now I'm like, is it the smallest computer we have? The phone in our pocket? I'm sure or like a chip that's in our refrigerator.
Oh, absolutely. The heck, the early cell phones were probably more powerful than that mini computer at the time, but we were running entire businesses off of it at that point. I mean, I remember watching my parents code, and it just I didn't have a choice. I was going to be a geek.
Like this is what you're doing. And now flash forward now, extremely successful at AutoZone. Um, and then where you talked a little bit about where you are, the scope of your company, your role today. I'd love to hear a little bit about how your company approaches data, and honestly, how this incredible background from almost the as soon as you can open your eyes, you've been knee deep in technology, and how that plays a role in how you think about your data strategy today.
So part of what makes t- AutoZone different than I want to feel like other companies I've been exposed to is IT is not responsible for providing a packaged solution to the business, right? We don't show up and say, here's your system, you get to use it. Um, we kind of flip it on its head. And so we really are trying to give the business the data almost raw and let them massage and manipulate it. And that's part of what has made Talend so critical is we're effectively the glue that connects so many of the internal systems. When you go into AutoZone and you are working with somebody and oftentimes you end up looking over their shoulder, they're showing you the screen. AutoZone has written all of that software. That's not purchased. That is our proprietary in-house software. Um, and there's, of course, tons and tons of data that has to get moved around. Those systems are connected. Well, Talent provides the glue in many of those instances to connect that data. Um, the where I'm at now, if I were to walk upstairs, I wouldn't just walk up to somebody that's a user. I'm going to walk up to somebody that's an analyst, right? They really know the business. They know the ins and outs. They understand the supply chain. They understand all of the different things that are going on. I mean, it is not just poof, how do you sell something on the shelf? It's how did you even get it on the shelf in the first place? How many do you have on the shelf? Where was it sourced from? You know, customers want to be able to walk in a store, get what they need, and then get home and work on their car, right? Because how many times have you seen somebody show up and their hands are still covered in grease because they were working on their car and realized, oh my God, I need another part or I need a different part. Um, so we don't have time to say, oh, we'll get that to you in 3 weeks. It's we got to get it to you in 3 minutes. And that makes for some very interesting logistical challenges. And we have to be able to move the data quickly so that the analysts can come up with the right decisions.
I love the visual of somebody coming in with sort of grease on their hands. You need to get a new part because it just shows the importance of you need information in real time so your business can react in real time. It's not that, and having this degree of predictability based on, I'm assuming you've got to look at things like in this particular region, these are the types of cars that are used. This is what people need the most of. Here's not just the parts that we needed last week, but it's coming into winter. What do we actually need to do and build? And having that information to make everything from your supply chain to stocking your shelves to even staffing becomes more and more critical.
Well, absolutely. If you look at the market as far as auto parts, and a lot of people stressed and had very difficult business situations during COVID. Um, we actually, to be perfectly honest, we did well because people were more cash strapped, and so it wasn't, hey, I'm going to go buy a new car. It was, I'm going to go make sure what I have today works. Right?
Yeah.
They weren't looking to pay somebody else to go do a bunch of work. It was they were going to get into it and take care of it themselves. It might be a brake job, it might just, be changing a battery or windshield wipers, but these were all things that people just their mind shift occurred as they were trying to take and figure out what they could do to address the situation for themselves. And AutoZone, quite frankly, has supported people that wanted to do it for themselves for a very long time,
Mm.
right? When it's really hot, things break down, right? When it's really cold, things break down, and those kind of extremes, and this was a different strain because it was economic, but it was still a strain. And people stepped up and figured out what it needed to be done for themselves so that they could be better prepared for whatever was next. And nobody knew, and nobody does know.
It's been really interesting. I mean, I've had such sort of a privilege of talking to so many customers like you and people in similar roles. And it's from the work you're doing at AutoZone to I had spoke to someone at GSK and someone at Estee Lauder, and literally all over in all of these industries, the thing that's constant is the world changed earlier this year, and this is how we reacted, and this is how we pivoted, and we didn't just sit here and say, okay, the world's different. Let's keep operating the same way. It's the world's different. So now I must act different. And this is how the business is going to adapt to really help serve the current needs of the world.
No, I mean I completely agree, and I think that's really what our next frontier is going to be. Is really um, anticipating better what everybody's needs are with the uncertainty. And of course, those things don't go well together, right? It's hard to anticipate when you don't know, right? Historically, to your point a little bit earlier, you could say, okay, here comes winter. We know we need to stock more batteries, right?
Yeah.
We need to stock a different kind of windshield wiper because this is what's coming. We're not going to sell as much car washing stuff because it's cold outside, right? But this is a different shift, right? People are going to be more concerned about, well, what do I need to do to extend the life of my car, right?
Mhm.
If it is more training material so that they can do more of it themselves because all they've ever done is windshield wipers, right? Now they want to take that next step and do a little bit more. AutoZone has had their loan a tool program for a very long time, and a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with it, but all of a sudden you're like, wait, I can work on my car and I don't have to go buy those expensive tools. Well, that is an eye opener for a lot of people because they're like, well, maybe it is worth me taking that leap of faith and giving it a try. And you know, I mean, how many times have you turned to YouTube on how to do something? Well, you know what? YouTube's got a lot of videos on how to do things for your car. And so come to us, get the parts you need, go back, work on your car, make it better, make it last.
That's awesome. Um, so I know you have to make decisions all day, every day that can impact your team, your customers, the company as a whole. So what's one of the hardest decisions you've ever had to make at work?
Well, the shared services thing was a big deal because a lot of people were used to take a project, put a developer on it, and so they were very single threaded, right? Most of the time, what I like to do is I prefer a shared services model because then I can say is here's the quantity of work, and I can then assign developers from my talent pool to work on it. So now all of a sudden we've got 3 or 4 developers working it all at once in parallel on multiple jobs. And what that does also is it also allows teams to avoid the only person that knows how this works is that one guy. And so now we've generalized the knowledge. It allowed us to implement a number of different policies and procedures from a best practices standpoint. It allows us to share more knowledge, and the overall approach and design of our talent jobs is more robust, and it doesn't fall apart in the way that I think that a lot of regular development does. I always tell people that if you go to a developer and say, how do you copy a file? They're going to go, oh, I just go to the command line and I do a copy and it's done. And I say, great. Now let's talk about that in the context of automating it so that it's robust. And they just kind of stare at you and you're like, okay, well, let's go through this. So first of all, is the file even there? Well, you need to make sure the file's there. Can you get to the source server? Can you get to the destination server? What if it's already on the destination server? Are you going to copy over it? You need to keep X number of copies of it. There's so many questions. Well, in the context of Talend, the way that we're doing it, we attack it from those questions and then design something that will handle that scenario as opposed to simply going, oh, I'm going to go happy path and assume the copy works, right? I need to design something that's robust and can deal with lots of different exceptions rather than just throwing up your hands and running out of the room and saying the sky is falling.
And I would say there's got to be a lot of change management that you had to put in place behind this.
So we're yes and no, to be perfectly honest. Um, we are using a series of controls switches that allow us to make changes and search across them in a way that makes it pretty flexible, though. Um, we definitely have that because you don't want things to break, but it's not as rigid as you might think. And again, it's because of the processes that we've tried to put in place to allow it to be flexible and robust.
I feel like you probably have more situations like this and more times in your current role where you just went, I have this really hard problem to tackle. I have this really hard decision to make. Do you have another one that's top of mind?
I think that what ends up happening for a lot of people is they get too deep in their own world.
Mhm.
And so I try to get my guys to step into their customer, be it another IT team or a business user, really listen, get a feel for it, step back, and they draw it out. And I don't care if they do it in Visio or Draw.io or Talend even, to really just have the conversation, right? Because everybody can get so wrapped up in the, oh, but there's this, and oh, there's that, and this exception and that. I was like, breathe, right? Let's talk about what you actually want and what you're trying to achieve. And then we'll start talking about some of the exceptions and some of the things that can break, and let's deal with those. But let's just breathe. And that's the agile piece in my mindset. It's really getting to understand the business. Don't just say, tell me what you need and I'm gonna go develop it. No, let's make it a conversation. Let's make it a two-way conversation.
It is. And once you understand this is what you're trying to accomplish, here's now the best way. Here's the best way to do it. To your point, it's don't tell me to copy a file, tell me what you really want to do. And then
Exactly.
figure out if that's even the right solution.
Absolutely.
And I feel like so much of what you do, and you're bringing all of this data together, you're bringing it up to business it, and you're bringing it to the business, and the business is able to make different types of decisions, hopefully better decisions on the fact now they've access to a lot more information. How do you work with the business to really push this mindset of um, what are you trying to accomplish, and how are we making sure we are that great partner to help build that?
So one of the things that I think falls out fairly quickly is um, a lot of the processes that we have. Again, AutoZone's been in business for 40 years, and so there is a certain amount of inertia where people are like, "This is how I've always done it. That's how I'm going to keep doing it because this works. It's tried and tested." Um, and you have to push them, but not so that they push it back, but so that they will go with you.
Mm,
And I think that what ends up happening is oftentimes it's if you can show them a different opportunity as opposed to it being a challenge,
mm.
um, they will then actually take whatever you've presented and run with it and go past whatever you were thinking. And I really think that that's what comes down to is that IT needs to work collaboratively with somebody versus trying to force them down the road in what they think is the right answer. And because invariably, as tools have gotten easier to use in some cases, the users will fly past IT because
Yeah.
we too will fall into those ruts and say, well, this is how we should do it, and this is how we do it. Um, and everyone needs to be open to changes and opportunities. And, we're at one of those crossroads right now.
How do you push your organization to keep thinking innovative, keep kind of pushing the boundaries and not being complacent in this is how we've always done things?
I think that, at least in my case, it has been showing how much project work we can do versus how much support work we have to do. Um, it's easy to drift into, well, we can't do that now. We don't have the bandwidth. We can't do this because we don't have enough people to support it. But we spend a lot of time designing and architecting, and we have developed a series of, I call them recipes, you could call them
Mm,
templates, but it's reusable pieces of functionality that have become tried and tested, but they're like building blocks, right? You take those pieces and all of a sudden you start hooking them together and you can achieve a significant amount of work without necessarily a significant amount of effort because of what we've developed prior. It could be obviously extracting from a database, loading to a database, moving files and encryption and stuff. Talend gives you all of these nice low-level building blocks. We've taken those and built on top of those and built reusable joblets and things that we can then apply to business requests or other T teams to get work done. And because of the fact that it's already tried and tested, that allows us to then move on to the next bit of what I want to call real work, that next business case that they need. And when you start doing that quickly, all of a sudden people are like, oh, wait, that's not going to take me 6 months. It's 3 weeks. And that's about where we're at. We tend to go from requirements to deployment in about 3 weeks. The other thing I've done is from a project management standpoint, I have pulled back the covers. There's no, IT black hole, black box that they
mhm.
can't see into. The business can see what I'm working on, what we're doing, what our progress is, where we're at, anytime they want. They just log into our project tracking system and they can see it because I make all my guys consistently put their updates in there. So the business doesn't come to me and say, what's the status? Because I have to then go to them and say, what's the status? And then I get the answer and I reply back, right? There's not that go between. They can directly see anytime they want. They want to go look at 2 a.m. and say, what's the status? They can go look at 2 a.m. and see the status, right? And that also has allowed me to focus on bigger, longer term pictures and plans so that then I can say, where do I want to take us? Well, that also has helped the team because then they say, oh, where are we going? What's the plan? It just all cycles and feeds into itself into a better approach.
And that has to only increase the collaboration and the trust between the work that you're doing and the rest of the business.
Absolutely. One of the things that, of course, happens is IT, we struggle with not being negative, right? We
Yeah.
very quickly drift into throwing up negatives and walls and saying, well, that's not how it works, so that's not how it should be. If you really want this, then it needs to be that. We drift into telling the business because we think that we know better, right? And it's supposed to be a collaboration. We are supposed to be working with them, not against them. It needs to be of not versus, and that's what we drift into, and that's hard. Um, and that is part of why it's so important to be transparent. And um, it definitely there was some resistance from my developers when I told them I expect you to update these tasks on that you're working on fundamentally on a daily basis. And they're like, "Oh," I said, "Or you can wait and let me call you and you give me the task status." And they were like, "Oh, we'll update it." Right?
Yep.
Because and it's not even that it was about micromanagement. It was that it was just easy because then it would be on their scale, their timetable, and then I took and I wrapped some automation around pulling those statuses from the PM system. And all of a sudden now the business could go and say, well, what were the changes in the last 3 days? Poof, there was a list. And they're like, oh, look at all the work being done for us,
Yep.
right? And so we started to gain that trust back because now they could see, wow, they really are doing our stuff. It's not a black hole. It's not that, that black box that we're so used to.
And I feel like this starts to be a blueprint for how do you build a high performing IT organization and one that has this that's based in this deep seated trust between the IT organization and the business because it only works if we're all working on this together.
It does, and that's part of why agile took off for so many companies because all of a sudden it put business into IT, and the business was able to provide feedback right away. Well, that's not where I want that on the screen, or that's not the button I want, or that's not how it's supposed to work. And that was great for front end development. It didn't work well for back end development.
Mhm.
When because the short answer is if I'm going to move a file, right? I can't go, oh, I'll pretend like I don't know what the server is. You actually have to tell me the server. You have to tell me the destination, right? So there are things that you have to tell me definitively. Fine, let's call those requirements, but you can do it in a different mode. And so all of a sudden now it is a hybrid model, right? It is faster. So people make like, oh, that's agile. Okay, it's hybrid, right? It really is this, but it is this speed of development that becomes important and the feedback loop. And then by providing the visibility into what's going on, it does feel faster and you don't end up with the well, you just get to see the final product is allowing the business to see the evolution. Quite frankly, there are a lot of times when they go, oh, that is really not where we were trying to take that, right? Or that's not how the data was supposed to be. We didn't realize that we were looking at it this way and or that you guys expected it to be that way. So just the communication allows things to be significantly more accurate as opposed to finding out later if you're right or wrong and because there's no degrees.
No, that's I think that's great. I think that's great advice for every person that's in an IT or a data role that's listening to this show is how you have those checkpoints and you bring people along for the ride because it's a lot easier to course correct mid process, early process versus here's your finished picture at the end. Oh, wait, we turned left instead of right because there was a misinterpretation somewhere or something changed along the way.
Absolutely.
Do you have any other tips or advice for people listening for how are you going to build that high performing team? How are you going to build that high octane data strategy?
I think the first thing is when you start looking at your tools, and obviously it's easy for me to point at Talend, um, is what does the tool generate that explains what it's actually doing, right?
Mm.
Historically, there's all these conversations that we have about, well, how good are the comments in the code, or how good is the documentation around it? Um, and those always seem to come after the fact. And that's part of what, to me, makes Talend particularly viable as a development tool, even in a more general purpose standpoint. It's easy to focus on you know, the the fancy data relationships and things that we can do with Talend, but you can do a lot of more general purpose things with it as well. And the fact that it renders itself as a flow and you can watch it execute as a flow allows you to do things in a much faster mode. We had a project earlier this year where, um, due to some lack of clarity with some requirements from another team, um, the application was struggling, and they had asked us to process some records, and we were doing it exactly like they asked. And they came back and realized they had made some design flaws on their side, and we needed to tweak ours. And so, quite frankly, over a weekend, I grabbed a couple of guys that had never even seen that process. We looked at what we were doing, and we rewrote it in 2 days. And we went from processing, and I probably don't have the numbers right in my head anymore, but it was maybe 2,000 a minute to 5,000 a second, or some sort of. It was a gigantic increase in performance, but it just had to do with us tweaking the process and able to see what it was doing very, very quickly, because of the UI. And that was the critical aspect, was is that we were able to review and shift quickly. And I think tools like Talend that allow us to focus on the process and not on the underlying code are critical. Now, we can of course go in and we can do a view source and see it if we really need to, but that's not where we start. That's only if we absolutely need it.
I feel like I can talk to you all day, but the producers will likely cut me off at some point. I would love to switch to a couple of quick hit questions. Are you ready for the rapid fire part of the show?
Sure.
Okay. What has become my favorite question is, what hobby or habit did you pick up during shelter in place?
So it's not as much a new habit as a continuing habit, to be perfectly honest. Um, my wife and I started fostering dogs back in April of 2013, and we have continued. And as of last week, we were up to 571 dogs.
Oh my gosh, at your house right now or just collectively?
Uh, Obviously at the house, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, do you have land or something?" And the answer is no. We have a third of an acre. The dining room is for the dogs, um, but we tend to take pregnant dogs that then, of course, they'll have the pups at the house, and um, it just keeps adding up. So yeah, we're at 571 as of last week.
That is absolutely amazing. I feel like you need to share photos of just dogs and puppies everywhere. All I have in my head is just your house filled with puppies, and it seems like the greatest place to live.
We have, at our worst or best, whichever way you want to think of it, have had actually up to 23 dogs in the house. So, like 2 weeks ago, we had three moms and their litters. Now, the litters were like 2, 5, and 7. But yeah, it makes for a lot of pups. It's definitely the feel good thing at the end of the day.
I I think that is amazing. They have I don't know if you know this, in pre-shelter in place when we used to go into offices, um, in the Bay Area, a lot of offices in the last 10 years have become dog friendly. And they found that having dogs in the office helped to reduce people's stress level.
Absolutely.
And so you must have, I don't know if you reach a certain tipping point where you maximize stress reduction or they become stressful, but I feel like we all need to explore having this many puppies around.
Well, part of it, to be honest, is you also drift into, every time you save a dog and you foster, it's almost like saving two. And this is what I always tell people, because everyone's like, "Oh, don't you fall in love with and want to adopt?" And the short answer is yes, but if you do that, then you won't foster another one. Because when you foster one, not only you're saving the one that's at your house, you've also made room in the shelter for another one. So it's like saving two. And when you don't let go and let them go to a forever home, that's what you've done, is you've stopped. And so that's, if I want to look at it that way, I could then kind of think of it as that we have saved 1,000 dogs. We haven't yet physically, but it feels that way. So it really is very nice.
I love that. I think you might have the best shelter in place hobby of anyone I've spoken to. And I think you've set the new bar on what to do with the your extra space in your house. Um, so if you weren't doing what you do today, what do you think you would be doing?
To be honest, I loved Lego.
Mhm.
As a kid, I built a ton and thought it was awesome. Um, and I thought I would be an architect because of Lego. And I remember in eighth grade, there was an architect that came to the school to take and profession day, and he threw up this beautiful blueprint. I'm like, that's awesome. And he said, but that's not what an architect does. And I just stared dumbfounded at him. And then he put this beautiful watercolor up of what that building would look like rendered.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I can't draw or paint. I'm done. And so I
Mhm.
went to the class that my dad was teaching on computer programming and just sat in the back and went, well, I know what I'm doing.
You're like, and the rest is history.
Pretty much, yes.
And I feel like now more architecture is done on a computer, but I don't know. I had to take an architecture class in high school and I couldn't draw a straight line. So that taught me very early on. Would never be my profession either.
Yeah, I might have been a good draftsman because I could do the lines. I just couldn't do the pretty part.
I had a T square and I still couldn't draw a straight line. It was always like 3 degrees off. I did not do well in that class. And I still remember 15-year-old Lauren barely passing architecture class.
Well, at least you got to take it. That sounds like a good class.
It was fun. I wish I wish I could do it now. All the things that we do now that we hated doing when we were young, like, I wish I would have paid more attention in French class, leaned into the architecture class, but, you know.
Definitely.
Um, so what is your favorite book or podcast that you've binged on recently?
So my boss had actually recommended, and he'd had all of his direct reports read Harvard Business Review's Manager Handbook, the 17 skills that leaders need. And it was a fabulous book. It was not particularly thick, and it covered a ton of different material, and it was easy to go, I know that, but then there was a lot of stuff you didn't,
Mm.
or better yet, there was a lot of stuff that you had forgotten. And it was a really good read just to remind you of the things that you should be doing as a leader.
I think we could all use that refresher sometimes. No matter how good you are, we could all use that. Um, Final question. Do you have any advice for someone who is getting started in a career in IT, in data, that wants to make a difference?
I always tell people that you need to find something in IT that you can relate to. Um, if you're a programmer, if you're a data analyst or a data scientist, do something that you actually would want to use, right? Um, if you're a programmer, it could be, create that to-do app that you actually helps you get work done. Um, if you're a data scientist, it's, figure out something about how you should invest, right? Take and pull a bunch of stock prices and write an algorithm that suggests how to do an investment. If you are into user interface, then go find an app that irritates you and redesign it and go, well, this is what it should look like. And then in all of those cases, be able to explain why it's better, right?
Mhm.
And really take that design to that next level. And I think that's when things start to make sense and gel, so that people actually go, oh, okay, I get what I'm supposed to be doing. Rather than it being some abstract thing, it becomes real because now you can actually enunciate and describe and put things in a context so that it makes sense to you and hopefully somebody else. And then all of a sudden now, because you're explaining to somebody else, you are now taking that first step toward that level of communication you need with others.
I think that is fantastic advice. Thank you so much for being on the show, for spending time with us. Uh, for anyone looking to fix their car, save their car, do better, I may ask you for advice for what to do on my next car as well, since I'm stuck in decision paralysis. So everyone, please check out AutoZone. And thank you, Jason, so much for spending this much time with us.
Absolutely.
Truth Be Known is brought to you by Talend. A leader in data integration and data integrity, Talend enables every company to find clarity amidst the chaos. Talend Data Fabric brings together in a single platform all the necessary capabilities that ensure enterprise data is complete, clean, compliant, and readily available to everyone who needs it throughout the organization. Learn more at talend.com. That's TALEND.com.